from all, to all, with all, for all, through all. We thank the gods of creation. We thank the ancestors. We thank the forces of nature. And we thank the earth. We thank them for their direction, their protection, their guidance, for keeping us, showing us, allowing us to know and enjoy life to its fullest, now and later.
Black people who once loved with the slow march of time. Time was ours to hold in the soft, love-warm chambers of our hearts. And was we, the Afro mommies and daddies of a sun world, would turn our strands of hair into antennas to tune in the juju madness and syncopated love rhythms of Africa. And we love with time, and we took the time to love, and with the right time we love, and we love time after time. Will we ever love again? Will we ever love again? Will we really ever love again? Or will we just sit and rot away with the brighter tomorrows in the skag-filled, rat-cluttered halls of our minds? Black people, what y'all gonna do? Black people, what y'all gonna do? Will the real black people please stand up?
Good evening to our Story family. I'm glad you're able to tune in tonight once again for the show. Once again, this is Brother Johnny sitting in for Brother WC, and tonight we are very privileged to have in the studio with us tonight our guest, good brother, Baba, Dr. Mwalimu, Samori Camara, who's with us tonight. And we really feel very honored and special that you've been able to make some time for us tonight to be with you, given not only your busy schedule, but what you got in store as far as traveling.
No doubt, brother. Thank you so much for having me on. You know, WC and you are definitely some good brothers and doing good work in the community. So while I'm here, you know, in the United Snakes of America, why not come on over, you know what I'm saying, to have a little conversation.
Yeah, well, we really are glad that you're here, brother. You know, could you just kind of give us some background? Not only, I guess first let's start with what you got going on, because I don't know if our viewers out there already are familiar with what's going on with you, and not only what you've been doing as far as for not only homeschooling, but for what's going on with people as far as black independent schools, but then in particular what you have going on with the Camara Academy. Well,
I've had Camara Academy. I had a homeschool here in New Orleans for 6 years. You know, I was a public school system teacher for about 5 years, man. And in my last stop in 2007 at Scotlandville High School in Baton Rouge, I realized that we needed our own schools. We had to have it and no one was going to teach us from our perspective and do what we need to do for our children. So I started Camara Academy in 2009 on the West Bank. Man, we had 2 students, you know, that first year, and the next year we had 15, and we kept it around 15 to 25 for those 6 years. And after having, you know, the physical school for 6 years, I decided to move, you know, and repatriate to West Africa, Ghana, West Africa. So I live in Accra now, where we do Camara Academy online, continuing to help people educate their children for liberation with our African-centered resources, African-centered curriculum, African-centered courses, you know, online for folks. And we got people all over the United States of America. We got people in the UK, and we have a lot of people in South Africa as well that's using our curriculum.
Now, you mentioned the resources and the curriculum. At least at the end of the show, can you make sure you give out your information where if we have people who want to get in contact with your parents who are interested perhaps in doing this with their children, where they can reach you at, you know, and give them some additional information, and maybe also they may want to see how they can get involved with the academy.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
One of the first times I heard about you, when I was living in California, a sister in Atlanta called me and told me to check you out on the internet. I think at the time it was on Facebook, and at the time I think you was involved with something called Sons of Malcolm.
Sons of Malcolm, yeah.
Can you give us a little background about what was going on with Sons of Malcolm?
Sons of Malcolm, El Hajj, Malik, El Shabazz. Yeah, man. In grad school, I went to the University of Texas at Austin for grad school, and the first week there, I met a good brother who's been my brother since then. In 2007 is when we met, Brother Amari Johnson. We said, actually, we had a radio show at first. We had a radio show in Austin. It's like, yo, man, let's just go on radio and talk some black talk, right?
Okay,
you know, it was on, you know, PhD students at University of Texas, man. You feel like we can go to a local black radio station, man, and get a show. And so the brother gave us a show, right? And we went on that show, you know, drive time, like it was like 4 to 6, right? And we was on the show, man, talking that black talk, and we weren't invited back. We weren't invited back after that show. I guess it was a little bit too black.
Yeah, in a city like Austin, you know, even though they consider themselves to be so-called liberal, they're not that liberal.
Right.
No, at least they're definitely not liberated as far as that mindset of being open to receiving that type of information.
I think that's probably what it was, because it was a black station, but maybe they were receiving a lot of white money.
Right.
And we didn't go that hard that first one anyway, man. But you know, after the show, you know, after they didn't invite us back, man, it was like, yo, we need to, you know, continue to do this. So we decided to just sit on our couch. And put a red, black, and green flag behind us and talk about different issues that were pertinent in our community. And what we did was, you know, we called it Make It Plain to People's Talk thing. So we went around campus or wherever we went, you know, in the United States, we would just interview people about different topics. So when we were doing it, you had Oscar Grant. You know, that happened while we were doing it. You know, we had shows also on, you know, black hair and black love and, you know, all, you know, black manhood and stuff like that. So we had all these different shows, man, and it got pretty popular. And, you know, still have about 60 shows on YouTube. People can go to YouTube and, you know, just put in Sons of Malcolm or Make It Plain, and they should see some of those videos. It got us an opportunity to travel to different universities, because teachers would play our videos, you know, for their class, for their classes, and we had an opportunity to be brought out to different universities, man, to just talk about that black stuff, man. Two brothers sitting on their couch.
I mean, obviously it was reaching out, because again, like I said, sister called me. She was in Atlanta area. Called me from Atlanta. I'm in California.
No doubt.
And again, that was during the time, like you mentioned, Oscar Grant.
No doubt.
And that mentioned to me what, you know, you all were doing and some of the things that was going on.
Yeah.
So I was glad to hear that, especially given the fact that it's always good to see younger brothers and sisters who are doing certain things, and to see younger folk. You know, I know, like when I talk to different individuals, you know, like when I deal with Brother WC, he's someone that maybe came through the 60s. You know, as far as me personally, I know a lot of things I came into contact and information with was more or less during the late 80s and 90s when people went through Afrocentricity. But, you know, to see someone your age and what y'all were doing now as we get into, you know, dealing with a millennial generation, it was very pleasing to see that, especially given the fact I informed you all were, and also to see that you all were continuing a legacy of, we have a lot of individuals who maybe get caught up academically and then they sort of lose their way. You know, but what we saw with you all was individuals who were allowing yourself to not only deal with things academically, but you also opened yourself up, and not only community individuals, but then you were able to still remain sort of grassroots and not allow that to get you off a particular path. So you stayed focused. And generally speaking, what we were seeing, or what I saw personally, was people who put thought or put thought into action, theory into practice, because you took something that was an idea and you then said, okay, well, what can we do as far as getting this particular information out?
Right.
And then what I appreciated too about a lot of times individuals will always make this about, well, what you doing? I'm doing this for the people.
Right.
When the reality is the people are smart enough and intelligent to know what to do. They don't need us or need anybody for that matter to tell them what to do. But what is good though, and what is a service that's provided, is when you put information out there, and then the people can then decide for themselves. And oftentimes then what they can also do is, if something's put out there, they can go research it and look it up for themselves. So again, it was very good to see that. But speaking, when we talk about the youth, what is your personal take on when they talk about the youth in this generation on perhaps things like Black Lives Matter, or some of the, you mentioned what was going on at UT Austin and how y'all were involved in traveling around different campuses. As we look at campus activism now and what's going on, you understand what I'm saying? What's your personal take perhaps on Black Lives Matter, or when they had the campus sit out or the blackout that occurred on various campuses throughout throughout the country? And you had, black students sort of having an awakening moment saying, this is what we want as far as what we want to receive back from the administration.
Man, I think it's a beautiful thing. And an elder told me a long time ago, he said, listen, if you're not a radical when you're young, what are you living for? You should be rebelling against something, right? So I like that part of it. But in terms of the Black Lives Matter movement, my question is, and my man would ask the same question, my man Samori Johnson, he would say, who are you talking to? Who are you telling that your lives matter? Right? Because if you're talking to these Europeans, they have shown you over and over and over again that your life doesn't matter. If your life matters, let's do something about what's going on in our community. Let's educate our own children. Let's make sure that the brothers who are shot down and the sisters who are shot down and the children who are shot down in the streets by these pigs, have some consequences and repercussions for those particular actions. So that's where I am, with it. And I think a lot of times we're looking for validation, and we're looking for Europeans to say to us, hey, yes, your lives do matter. They're never going to say it. And if they do say it, does that bring back any other brothers and sisters who have been slain by these folks? So that's my view on, really the whole Black Lives Matter, movement for the most part. I'm asking the question, what are we doing? Are we building? Are we just marching? Are we holding our hands up and saying, don't shoot? I would never hold my hands up and say,
I'm saying, I can't breathe.
I can't breathe. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not, personally, I'm not doing that. That is a position of surrender. And we know that whether or not your hands are up, your hands are down, you have a hood on or you don't have a hood on, you got a suit on, you're walking, you're driving, you're not driving, you have a license for a gun or you don't have a license for a gun, they do not care. Your life does not matter to them. The question is, what are you going to do about that? And that's the question I have for black people in general, as well as the so-called, younger activists who are out there. I refuse to march again.
Now, you bring up a good point about, what are we to do about this? If we do some research, or we just look at some of these individuals out here who have sort of analyzed perhaps some of the things we're dealing with. We have individuals such as Dr. Patricia Newton and Dr. Degree and so forth as regards to dealing with this slave syndrome.
Post-traumatic.
And we have Neely Fuller, who's given us a compensatory code on how perhaps we should conduct ourselves in terms of the system of white supremacy. But the issue we tend to always deal with is this issue of, you constantly hear this thing with personal responsibility. My view has always been, it's very difficult to take personal responsibility for something when you have not, in this system or in this time and space, been allowed to be your authentic self. So you're not even acting out of who your true self is because you don't know even who your true self is.
Know who it is.
So I guess what I'm asking you, what would be your take as far as, this whole, issue where folk tend to go back in regards to how much of this is
our responsibility.
Exactly.
I can dig it, man. A lot of times when you talk this black talk, many of the folks who don't want to deal with the issues will say, well, you always blaming the man. You're always blaming somebody else. You know what I'm saying? As you said, we have some personal responsibility. I tell people, the reality is we must understand, our people must understand how we got in this situation and who put us in this particular situation, who profits from keeping us in this particular situation. We must understand that first and foremost, and that is the European. right? And all their henchmen that go along with that. But the reality is also that they're not going to get us out of this thing. We got to do it ourselves. We got to build for ourselves. We know what they do, what they have done. We must articulate that for our people who seem to be missing that reality, right? But we must make sure that we build our own schools. If we say they're miseducating us in the schools, if we say that they're suspending our children, they're disciplining them in a different way, build your own schools. Right? Stop looking to the very people who are putting you in this situation to do something for you. And stop telling our children just to get over whatever is going on against them in those particular schools or in this particular environment and just go along to get along. That kind of mentality for me is a slave mentality, as you say, with the gear to post-traumatic slave syndrome, and we got to get out of that. We don't want to teach our children to be reasonable. Reasonable people got us in this situation right now. We need unreasonable revolutionaries at this moment if we're going to have any responsibility at all. Because if not, we're going to be dead, mentally, spiritually. Most of us are spiritually dead. Believing in somebody else's spirituality that's been forced upon us, by whoever. And definitely mentally dead. Mental side is real in our community. We don't want anything to do with being black, man. A person asks you, why you always on that black stuff? And they black. And you say, well, why are you on that white stuff? If you black, do you have white folks who own that black stuff? Do you have white people that tell another white person, why are you always on that white? That kind of question right there, it shows a serious lack of consciousness and a serious slave mentality.
Now, you mentioned something about, education and that being something that's important. Mm-hmm. And you always hear individuals, I know when I was coming up, people would always say, go out and get that education. Right. But no one ever specified, well, yeah, you need to get an education, but my opinion should be an education of self and kind. And not this institutionalized education that we deal with. Yeah. And you mentioned that you worked in the public school system. Right. You're someone that you came through this institutional system in terms of you have your PhD. Yeah. What is it that you can give perhaps individuals out there some insight in regards to what you see as maybe the pitfalls or the downsides as far as our participating in this educational system being so-called black people?
Yo, man, I mean, there's all the pitfalls. There's so many. Mm-hmm. First and foremost, our children come out of those situations with no knowledge of self, and that's why we have adults who don't fight for African people. How can you fight for something that you don't know? And if you don't know that something, you can't love that something. So we don't know ourselves and we really don't love ourselves. And we can say, yeah, I love myself. That's why I put this weave in my head, because I think I look presentable like that. But our children are coming from those situations with severe lacks mentally, in terms of self-love and our, black psychology. Also, as a parent, did you have children for somebody else to raise them? Our children, they go to school in the morning, let's say, 7 or 6 o'clock in the morning. I see some children out there at 5:45 waiting on the bus, right? And so our children go off to school. They stay in school for 6, 7, 8 hours a day, sometimes 9 hours with these charter schools, having the school open longer, right? Then we get our children back, and we have maybe 2 or 3 hours with them, then they go to sleep. And you just do that over and over and over again. How much time do we even have with our children, right? Somebody else is raising our children. And then those people, we don't even know those folks. Those folks don't even have, a lot of times our own best interests in heart. Many of these folks are here to get their loans repaid, so they can keep it moving, right? Or many of those folks don't care about African children at all, even some of those people that look just like me and you. Right, so we give our children over to a system that doesn't validate them as an African person, that only focuses on standardized testing, and rote memorization, read, remember, and regurgitate, and all those kind of things in classes. So those things there are harmful to our children. A lot of times they don't even focus on our children's, talents or passions. Instead, they focus all about their weaknesses. If a child comes home, even for parents, if a child comes home with an A, a B, a D, and then another A, what's the first thing a parent is going to look at? That D, and they're gonna spend, even though that child got 20% of their grade was that D, they're gonna spend 80 to 85, 95% of their time harping on that particular child getting that D. Why don't we focus on our children's strengths and make sure that they have that, and that'll help them deal with their weaknesses. But if we always focusing on their weaknesses, like as the school does, it really takes the energy and love out of education for our children. You know, we see our children, they come into school in the first grade, particularly black boys, with a light of love in their eye for education. They love learning. By the time they get to 3rd and 4th grade, look at those same black boys, right? Because being in those school systems, man, the school system is a plantation. My daughter, I guess it was last summer, we were riding down the road, and my daughter said, "Baba, is that a prison?" And we was on the West Bank, and I said, "Yeah, that's a juvenile prison right there." And then we made a right, and we was rolling down the road, and we saw a middle school. She said, "Baba, is that a prison?" I said, "Wow. Yes, it is. It's a prison for the African mind. It's a prison for the black mind. It is intellectual incarceration going on over there because our children never understand who they are. And if we're going to get out of the situation that we're in, then we have to be teaching our children from that perspective. And college is not the logical next step for everybody. College is, in many ways, yes, this is coming from a brother with a PhD, college in many ways is a bad investment at this moment. And it's probably going to be a worse investment as we go along. I would say if you ain't going for free, you might want to just chill, because you're going to come out there with a whole lot of debt, and you're not going to know much. Because even if you get a job, and there's not many jobs out there for you, but even if you get a job, what they're going to do? They're going to train you again. You know what I'm saying? Because they're going to say, you ain't really learned that in school, and so we're going to train you again. And most of us, we forget everything that we learn after we take the test. Most of us are not even smarter than a 5th grader. You remember that show, Are You Smarter Than a 5th Grader?
Yes.
We were watching that show. We don't even remember any of that stuff. So a lot of times we put our children through that same particular situation because somebody else said. Because somebody else said, this is what you need to take. This is what you need to know if you're 6 years old, if you're 7 years old. Forget what they said we need to know. We have our own standards. At Camara Academy, we don't have a common core, we have an African core. We don't have standardization, we have Africanization of our children, because that's what we need to be doing.
Well, you mentioned something very important when you said an African-centered education. And what we're seeing here with this, as you spoke, it's very difficult to almost see the difference between a prison and a school now. Mm-hmm. And we often hear this term, the school-to-prison pipeline. Right. And, some will say our children are being institutionalized in a way. Absolutely. To either set them up either to go into prison, go into the military, mm-hmm. or you're going to essentially find yourself in a prison-type environment working a particular 9-to-5 mm-hmm. job. Mm-hmm. This is the opinion of many will say this. And what you have with not only the privatization that's occurring with the public school system across the country, not only just here in New Orleans area, but also what you see is sort of with Teach for America, mm-hmm. City Teach, it's almost like they're hired mercenaries brought in mm-hmm. like an occupying force to deal with the children. Mm-hmm. And many of these individuals this is not their chosen profession. No. They're doing this essentially to pay off a debt mm-hmm. in a way like debtor's prison. Wow. So they themselves are entering into this arrangement mm-hmm. from a prisoner standpoint as well. So you have two individuals that really don't want to, at least from my opinion, be involved in this process. Now, I'm not saying that's everyone. Right. But I'm stating the rule. Of course, there's always exceptions to the rule. But generally speaking, this is the rule, and this is why we're seeing, at least from my opinion, these institutions still not producing the product. But here's the catch, as you mentioned before, it's our responsibility, though, to say, okay, we cannot expect someone who won't treat you right to teach you right. Hello? So what are we doing to offset this? And you mentioned something, African-centered education, but not everyone, can homeschool their child. Okay. Not everyone can start a Camara Academy. Mm-hmm. What would you say are some things that people can do then if they're in a position where their child is still a part of the school system? Take your children out of the school system. Okay. So you say everybody can't homeschool. Okay. Everybody can't start a Camara Academy. But there's people in your community that's thinking about it also. I mean, how do you think our children feel when you come together with your friends and you talk crazy and talk dirty about the school system in front of your child, right? And then you get up in the morning and send them right back to that place. Right, our children are seeing us as very powerless people if we can't do something about the education of our next generation.
If our children are important to us, then we will find a way to make sure they get the kind of education that we need, the kind of education that will teach them how to solve the problems that we have, the kind of education that will help them be the kind of people that will use their personal skills and talents for the benefit of our community. We have more PhDs, more master's degrees, more bachelors than we've ever had in our history in this country. And black people are still on the bottom, and black people are still being shot down in the streets. So it must mean that the kind of education that we're getting is no good. And if we understand that, then we have to find something to do differently from what we already have. Mm-hmm. And that's going to take a little, I'm not going to say a sacrifice, it's going to take a decision. And the decision, comes from the Latin root, that means to cut off. So we have to cut off some of the things that we've been doing in order to do what we must do for our children, right? So we have to just make a decision, man. There's going to be some other people that say, hey, when they get home, just go ahead on and give them that, some real education, to just reteach what, to point out to them the lies that they learned in school, or try to fight to get an infusion of African-centered education or black history in the schools. To the first point, if your children are at school for 6 or 7 hours, you don't know everything that's going on in that school. You don't know the microaggressions that happen. Your child will not be able to articulate all the little things that, those sneaky and, conniving kind of things that teachers do in terms of the education that they get in the schools, right? We're not going to talk about all the other stuff that happens with the children that we don't even know about, right? But also, if we infuse so-called black history into the schools, who's going to be the teacher of that, right? You think these little white teachers are going to, teach our history, from a truthful kind of perspective, or even some black person who don't want anything to do with being black? They're going to just teach it like, okay, we got to do this now. So Malcolm X, yeah, this is Malcolm X, and he died. Moving on. You know what I'm saying? So it matters who, the information is coming through. Right, and it doesn't even matter really the curriculum, because you recreate who you are. You can teach what you know, but you recreate who you are. And if we have teachers who are not, as you would say these days, woke or conscious, they're going to reproduce students who are not. Right, because our children are going to see very clearly what they value. Our children are going to say, all right, teacher so-and-so don't like that black stuff. I ain't writing that black stuff. I ain't thinking that black stuff. I'm just giving them what they want, and I'm going to get this grade. Right? Some of our children, but the vast majority of our children are even dropping out. Right? They're not. They say that one study said that black male high school dropouts many times had a higher IQ than black male graduates. Our smartest and brightest are not dealing with that garbage. Our smartest and brightest, like Malcolm, are on the streets right now, hustling. Waiting for somebody to believe in them, to focus on their talents and their passions instead of their weaknesses. Because, how can a brother be dealing with all his weight on the streets, right, and not know mathematics? Because you didn't teach him through his interests. I'm not saying teach him through drugs, you know what I'm saying, but you didn't teach him through his interests so he can get it and see that there's a future for him in that particular area, right? We got geniuses out there that's not getting it. Somebody else will tell you, do those particular things. I'm gonna tell you, take your children out. You have schools here in New Orleans that are already homeschooled. So Kamala Academy is not here physically, but you have community, Amaru Community School. They can look that up. You have Adinkra-Nola, and you have a number of other schools that are popping up to service our children from an African-centered perspective. Find them if you know something needs to be done. If not, stop whining. If not, let your children, go over there. And also the question is, why do you want your children to have an education? What's the purpose of that education? Most people I just want my child to be able to do for themselves. We don't need people just able to do for themselves. We need revolutionaries. We need people that's going to change the world. And our children are not going to, be taught and trained to change the world in that particular system that is teaching them, educating them for subordination and not liberation.
I'm going to share a personal story. When we talk about black independent schools, I was working at a black independent school in Atlanta. This is years ago, back in the 90s. And it was an elementary school through high school. And they had a split. One group wanted to be more Afrocentric and cultural. Right. Another group wanted to go more from the standpoint of testing. What do we need to do to prepare these children academically? So there was a split that occurred. And I noticed, though, that what happened was the group that went to the cultural side and said, we want to promote wearing cultural clothing,
Right.
cultural curriculum, we're going to have certain things built in, that group began to shrink. Whereas the school that went more to the side of, we're going to start adhering more to these particular standards that have been set out
European
there, even though
standards.
we're a black independent school,
Right.
that school increased. And generally speaking, the parents that we had or that you would run across were parents that did not choose this school because it was about getting an African-centered education for their child. It was more or less for two reasons. First and foremost, either they were concerned about the public school system from a religious standpoint, from their view or opinion that they were of the impression that their child would be exposed to,
Right.
or most importantly, unfortunately, many of them, it seemed, just wanted to be able to say that their child was in private school. So it seemed you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm not saying this is going on all over the place, but I was
going on.
able to take this situation and look at when I spoke to people in D.C. area, in Chicago, California, where I saw some of the same things occurring.
Right.
And we know this is something that started, I don't know if the viewers understand, between 1966 and 1970, there were a series of conferences that led ultimately to black people, as you mentioned, coming together and saying, let's start our own. And what they started was the Conference of Independent Black Institutions.
Right.
Some viewers may be familiar with Hakeem Manabuti, used to talk about this, was a proponent, particularly of the one in Chicago. But what I began to see in the 90s was more people were going towards, they either want religious base when they think of getting out of the public school system, or it's the idea of I'm in private school. But what they still wanted, though, was certain hallmarks to be met.
Right.
Certain, in their opinion, so-called academic criteria, because ultimately their mindset was, we want our child to get into a particular college or university.
Right. Yeah.
And the thought was, well, if we go too far, as you put it, down this so-called black stuff, will that then allow my child to then get into this particular college or university?
Yep.
And it goes back to when individuals say, oh, well, I have a positive self-image, or I am in control of my life and so forth. Most of the things that you hear us concerned about, whether it's education, politics, economics, even certain things to a certain degree that deal with us from a socio-cultural aspect, we control none of these mechanisms.
Right.
So in order for us to say take personal responsibility, most of us are trying to become responsible with something that has nothing to do with us. So that you'll hear this term often thrown out, well, you just got to play the game. And the problem I have with that is that people think there's only one game. And from my view, the game, they don't see as well, in order to play the game has been based upon, already rigged for you to be the loser.
Right, exactly. And I really, when you say play the game, when people say play the game, I'm glad some of my ancestors didn't say that on the plantation. I'm glad some of my ancestors say, I'm not playing this game. I'm going into the bush with a knife. I don't know what's going to be out there, but I am going to meet it and I'm going to deal with it, because any place is better than this place, right? And so stop playing the game. What has the game gotten us? What has the game gotten us? So, that question right there. And so when you have the people who are thinking, all right, I just want my child to be in private school, or I just want my child to be smart like white people. I just don't want, they're not going to get that in the public schools. So I understand exactly what you're saying, because many people sent their children to Kamali Academy, the physical school, to be fixed. The school system broke them. So he said, let me go ahead on and so you can get fixed. Why? So you can go right back into the school system. And it would break my heart, man. The children would come in and we would do a great job with them, for a year or 2 years or whatever, and the parents would come smiling and say, thank you so much, Brother Samori. My son's self-esteem has gone through the roof. He's up to speed. He's even above his grade level, that he's supposed to be in and all that kind of stuff. Thank you so much. We're bringing him back. I said, why would you bring him back to a place that broke him in the first place? But it comes to the question of whose well done are we looking for? Whose well done are we seeking? We're seeking the well done of Europeans. Man, we want their approval, brother. every time many people call, they call me or they email me and they ask the question, is Kamali Academy's curriculum accredited? Is it approved? I said, we don't look for accreditation from any European educational body, right? Because they will not give you the right of way or the approval to teach your children the way they need to be taught. So we don't look for that. If you're looking for that, Kamali Academy is not the place for you. We have to have our people imagine a nation where we are in power. We cannot imagine that. If you ask the viewers right now to close their eyes and think about, black people being in power. Like really, the Europeans are not around. Europeans don't run nothing. Black people run it. Black people got their own land, their own schools, their own banks, their own everything. Can you even imagine that? That's the majority of African people can't imagine that. So we believe, we believe that white people will always be in power. So we got to play their game, even if the rules are rigged against us. Even if even if the House always wins. We see like just a couple people win a little bit, getting a couple crumbs off the table, and we want to be just like that. Even though we see the vast majority of our people are suffering.
Now you mentioned our ancestors and what they did as far as resistance and rebellion, and that brings up a good point as far as us saying, okay, we're gonna be that runaway slave.
Right.
We're gonna engage in a maroon form of education.
That's it, man.
Looking at what you're doing, though, two questions I get oftentimes, and you mentioned part of it. Individuals will say, well, if I want to, for some reason, move, or if I have to transfer, how can I take these transcripts to another school? Then another question I often get is, well, I don't want my child with a GED. How is it that these transcripts or this diploma, will this be accepted, at the next level?
Right.
How would you address that?
So I would say absolutely. Since people don't like to hear stuff from black people, white people have been doing this for years and years and years, and sending their children to schools, and they'll have their children not taking any formal classes at all. They'll create a transcript that said that he read 50 books. This was his English or language arts curriculum for each year. He read these books. He wrote this particular book report or summaries on those particular books and wrote this essay. That's all he has for his English. Here's what he did for mathematics. Here's what he did for science and all these different things, right? They took 4 years of ballet. That's their PE. So they've been doing this for a long time. The reality is also that the vast majority of children, 60% at last count, 60% of black children, white children, red, whoever children, right? They go into college and have to take remedial courses in reading and in math. So that's telling us that the high schools are not doing what they're supposed to do. Many homeschool children, they're going, the vast majority of homeschooling children are going in and they don't have to take those. Why? The college admissions counselors, many colleges now and universities have admissions officers who only deal with homeschool cases, right? And they see that we actually want homeschoolers because those children are a lot of times more well-rounded. And they have more talent. They have the ability to read, and write better than the vast majority of children who are coming out of public schools, and they can reason and deal with numbers and manipulate numbers a lot better than those children. Colleges will take your money. Colleges will, enroll your children into the situation. And there's also many homeschool scholarships that you can get. We have a number of students who came out of Kamali Academy and, received, went on, into college, right? When you start, particularly here in Louisiana, if you start your child in homeschooling before the 11th grade, you can grant your own diploma, right? If you're kind of skeptical about the homeschooling piece, call the colleges you think your child might want to go to and ask them what do they require, for a homeschool child coming out of your particular homeschool. Call them up, see what they require, and do those things if you want them to go that route, right? But I also tell people, what is your child interested in? What is their talent? What is their passion? Focus on that. Everybody doesn't need to go to college in order to do what they do well. There was a brother who went to a great chef. He says, "Listen, I have a choice to make. I really wanna work for you. okay? But I'm thinking about going to culinary school, for a couple of years, and coming back. Or if I can get a job now, I'll take a job now. He said, well, listen, if you take the job, if I give you the job now, there's a pot of potatoes over there. I will tell you to go skin those potatoes. Now, if you go to culinary school for those 2 years and pay $50,000, whatever you're going to pay, when you come back here, I'm going to tell you, and if I give you a job, there's 2 pots over there with potatoes in it. I'm going to tell you skin those potatoes. Your choice, right? So if a lot of times, depending on if you're not going to be, a doctor, some kind of neurosurgeon, you know what I'm saying?
Right,
all those kind of things.
Right.
The reality is there's so many colleges that have their classes online for free. And the way the world is going, one does not need to go onto a college campus to get the kind of knowledge that they need, right? Whatever I do, I don't have a PhD in education, but I'm one of the more sought out folks when it comes to black education in this country, right? Because of the time I've put in, the trust I've built up with many people, and talking to them and putting out resources. People know what I'm talking about, so they pay me for that knowledge. I didn't have to. I don't have approval from somebody else. Maybe because I got the PhD. I got the good white man's letters behind my name. They listen to me a little bit more. But even before I had that, people were already listening, right? So those things don't matter as much as we think. And the reality is, you're sending your child to go to college to get a job, and they ain't got no jobs for us when they get out. I taught at Dillard University for 4-5 years before I left. To go to Ghana, and many of my students, shout out to my students from Dillard, many of my students don't have jobs. Most of my students, if they do have a job, or don't have a job in the field that they got the degree in. You know what I'm saying?
The answer they're always going to say is, well, perhaps that's because of what they chose to major in.
Right.
That is actually incorrect. The majority of individuals in this country actually major in business. Very few individuals will major in basket weaving or women's liberation studies. And actually research shows that those who tend to major in the arts, and in particular tend to major in things such as feminist studies or African American studies, those individuals tend to get employed.
Get jobs.
Whereas those who tend to major in business and these other fields that they claim individuals are not getting, those are the ones that are unemployed.
You're sitting down somewhere.
Yeah, because and so you have this narrative that they're putting out there. Well, if you're not employed, it's your fault. When the reality is, no, it's just that regardless, as you mentioned, they're not going to have the jobs anyway for you.
Some of the jobs that they used to pay people $30,000 and $40,000 a year for, they're outsourcing those jobs to somebody else. Right, they don't even have jobs for white folks. Why do you think you're gonna have jobs for your black child? Stop it. Teach your children to become an expert at something. I don't care what it is. Become an expert at something, and somebody will pay them, for their knowledge in that particular thing. Teach your child to build a business for themselves. We need everything. We need everything. We need our children's personal skills and talents to benefit us. White folks don't need more doctors. That we need doctors, for our own selves.
Well, let me ask you this question. From my experience, you mentioned earlier, you have a lot of individuals, their children, they get into the independent school system because when we left the public school system, my back was against the wall because my child was getting in so much trouble.
Right.
He or she was so behind. This is why we chose to go to a black independent school.
Right.
So you have, after a while, as you mentioned, some of them, when they feel their child is, or they're of the view their child is up to speed, they're ready to get the child out of here. But another issue I've run into is the issue of sports, and also the issue of, with the homeschooling, where I'm concerned about my child, the socialization.
Dun, dun, dun.
And that's the constant thing you hear over and over again, where I want my child to be involved in sports or various activities or certain socialization that they can't get this route, they can only get going through the so-called institutional educational system.
Well, that's not true, actually, though, right? And so number one, we have a homeschooling conversation that's happening on the 23rd from 2 to 5. That's going to be Sunday. Man, I can't even remember where it is. If you look at my Instagram, Baba Dr. Samori, Baba Badr Samori, Samori, you'll see the flyer there. I forget the name of the place, but we're going to have this kind of conversation on Sunday. But many states, particularly and in Louisiana, they have something called the Tebow law. Tim Tebow, you know, the famous football player and all that kind of stuff, now a baseball player, he was homeschooled, right? He was homeschooled, but he played football at a local private school in Florida, right? Went on to get a scholarship and all that kind of stuff to Florida and went to the NFL. But so people understand that your child can play high school sports and all those extracurricular activities if they're homeschooled. You know, granted, they got to be good enough to make it. You know what I'm saying? But they have that opportunity to do that. So that's off the table right now. Your son want to run track, you know, but you want to homeschool him, let him run track. Football, basketball, all those things can have, even cheerleading, right? Just deal with the principal at the place. And the other thing you said was socialization. Yeah, we hear that all the time. What does socialization mean? Socialization, if you look at it in a dictionary or something, is to socialize, to acculturate someone for a particular society. And if we're dealing with that with our children, then we know this society is going to, create basically slaves, again, people who cannot look outside of them, who only look outside of themselves to solve their problems. And that's what we're doing, right? But if we talk about socialization, I think that's what really parents are talking about when they're talking about socialization of their children. Our children can have ample opportunities when they're homeschooling to socialize with other people, with other children, right? But also, in a public school system, when you have a situation where the only thing that's most important about you is your date of manufacture, that you were born in 1983 or 1999 or 2005, that's a really unnatural kind of situation in the first place. I don't know how old you are, but we're not the same age, but we can have a dialogue and we can learn from each other. There's not going to be another time outside of high school or K through 12 where your child is going to be around all other children of the same age. That's craziness. That's a factory kind of model when you talk about education. Homeschoolers, my daughter has been homeschooled since she was born. She's 5 now. And when we were in Ghana and just when we were around, people always comment that she is so confident and that she's so easy with adults. She's so easy with children that are younger than her, children a little bit older than her, children even her age. She doesn't have, this issue with authority that many children have. They feel like they can't have a conversation with an adult because the only time they've seen an adult is their parent and their teacher, somebody that's always over them. Homeschooling children have the opportunity to deal with the vast majority of people in our community, all kinds of folks. And that's a much better socializing experience than in a school. Now, your children don't get to socialize much in the schools anyway. We have schools that don't even have, you can't even talk at lunch. You can't even talk in the hallway. You can't talk in class. So you might have a little bit of time at PE, and the PE might be 30 minutes. So what kind of socialization is going on really? Right? And of course, your children are also dealing with children who might not have the same morals and values that you want to instill in your children. So they're socializing with those folks. And they're coming home and they're singing different songs. They're coming home and they're doing different things. And you say, where the hell did you get that from? So there's a whole bunch of socializing that's going on, but we can give our children, an Africanization when they get home and really instill our values and our culture into them.
Well, we have to understand time in equals time out. And if your children are spending, in some cases, 8, 9, 10, 11 hours when you count these bus services now a day, and they only spend a few hours with you, then who's going to ultimately have the influence? So when you speak of socialization, then they're getting socialized, but what type of socialization are they getting?
Absolutely.
And I mean, again, as we talk about what's going on with the schools now, it's almost as if you're dealing with an enslaved population, because many of them, when I see them, especially as we go into the fall and the winter, it seems just like our ancestors, they're going to school just like that plantation from no can see in the morning to no can see at night. You understand what I'm saying?
That's true. Yeah, man. No, it's definitely happening all over the place, man. And when we talk about that plantation stuff, man, a lot of times people are like, come on, man, it's not that bad. But it is. Think about how our children act when school is over. Like when summer is, when now it's time for summer, our children act like they are free. They're finally free. Why would you act like that if it wasn't a prison, if it wasn't a plantation? Somebody tells you, if you got to raise your hand to go to the bathroom. They tell you when to eat. They tell you when to talk. They tell you what to wear and what not to wear. They tell you to do work that has nothing to do with you. And read stuff that has nothing to do with your culture. That's a prison kind of environment. You know, and they got the security guards and all that kind of stuff in the schools. Now you got the metal detectors and all that kind of stuff. That kind of environment teaches our children very, very well the kind of society they live in and how they view African people, no matter where we go.
And I want our viewers, in my opinion at least, to have an understanding that you hear this going on as far as the institutionalization of our children in the public school system. At least from my perspective, it doesn't mean, oh, well, put my child in a Montessori school or in a Waldorf school or all these other various, some cases, German and Austrian forms of education that has been developed. When you're dealing with so-called black children, we need a specific education catered to the needs of our children.
Of African children, absolutely, absolutely. And an African-centered education is, in my view, the only education that can really serve our children the way our children need to be served, right? When you talk about these other educations, you know, our children, you know, go into this place, let's say like they're going to a restaurant, and at this restaurant, these people feed you whatever they want to feed you. And they feed everybody the same thing, right? And they expect you to like it. They expect you to digest it all. And when you digest it, they want to, you know, grade you on your digestion. You know, think about if you went to a restaurant, would you accept that? This is a service. Education is a service, yes? So that service should be catered to the particular needs of the people that is, you know, within that. But African people have never been, and you know, and will not be unless we start our own catered to in that particular system. So we have to. Yeah, we have to.
I stress that, and I mean, if individuals, you can go out there and research Dr. Amos Wilson. He has many books and papers on that subject matter of how our children need a particular African-centered education.
The time. Amos Wilson, speaking of Amos Wilson, I'm an Amos Wilsonite. Read The Falsification of African Consciousness. Read The Blueprint for Black Power. Read Black on Black Violence, the psychodynamics of black self-annihilation in the service of white domination. Read Awakening the Genius of the African Child by Amos Wilson. Read these books by this brother. But he says our children are destroyed by the time system alone in the schools. So your child, you know, who's at home all day and every day speaking black vernacular, speaking Ebonics and all that kind of stuff. He goes to the school, he has 45 minutes for English, right? Everybody around him, you know what I'm saying, all day, they speak a different kind of language. He has to go in there and he has to learn this particular language in this particular time, right? Now, the little white child, you know, goes into that class, everybody else speaks so-called standard English, whatever standard English is, in their home. So when they go into the classroom for that 45 minutes, they're just brushing up on what they already know. Now, when that black child and that white child takes a test and the black child doesn't score as well as the white child, then they say that child is learning disabled. You know what I'm saying? And he needs to do more and more and more, and so he gets left behind. Just that time system alone. When we go into have our own school system, we have to ask the question: what issues do we have? What problems do we have? And give ample time to those in our curriculum. The people who created the curriculum that you have right now created in 1892. Yeah, they said that you got to take algebra in 9th grade, geometry in 10th grade, you know, algebra 2 in 11th grade, on and on and on. Those were 10 white men that had nothing to do with us, who could not care about us, right? And so if we have our own schools, relationships, rites of passage has to be a great big part of that. Because how many people do we have that are smart but who feel like they can't work with black people? How many people do we have who are famous and all that kind of stuff, and they choose people for mates who don't look like us? You know, so those kind of things must be in our curriculum. We need what we need, and other people need whatever they need. We don't care what they need. Our problems are different. And an African-centered education is the only way that African people are going to get free.
Well, you mentioned empowerment. And as we look at the future and what's going on, there are not going to be those jobs for our kids. So I want to just draw a book. One of the books that really helped influence me as far as dealing with the independent black institutions was a book by Kwame Akoto called Nation Building.
Nation Building,
And what it talks about is how we need to empower our children to look beyond school as far as you need school for a job. What tools can you get from school to help move you beyond to how we can empower yourself individually and begin to use that to create for your family and your community.
Absolutely. No, the Akotos, man, wrote a great book. You know, they have a school that's still in D.C. right now. Nation Building is a great book. But I was talking to Dr. Marimba Ani just this past weekend, and she said, listen, our people don't need to be going to colleges. You know, that's just, you know, we don't necessarily have to do that, right? Instead of going from school to college, maybe our children should go from school to the continent of Africa, right? And have some apprenticeships there, where they can learn. If you want to be a doctor, you're going to learn under a healer in Africa. If you want to be an engineer, you want to be an architect, you're going to learn from an architect in Africa. White folks, we always like to, compare our situation to them. So forget that. We won't say nothing about no white folks. We should just do it, because colleges are not a great investment at this moment, and we have everything that we need for ourselves to be better in this particular world at this time.
And you bring up a good point. There's so many times when individuals think about not going on to college, they think about, going to trade school, welding, barber. What they don't understand, oftentimes with many of these professions that we're speaking of, it still makes you dependent upon this economic system and the way that this system is set up. What you're bringing up is something more important in terms of maybe you can go into something besides these usual options and say, well, how can we go into this and say, this is something I can bring back to my community?
Absolutely.
We're running out of time. Can you go ahead and give information out where people can contact you?
Okay, so absolutely. So Samori Camara on the Book of Face, Baba Dr. Samori on Instagram, or you can also find me at KamaliAcademy.com. Kamali is Kamali Academy.com. And I got a bunch of other stuff, but I think that's good enough.
Okay. All right, we appreciate you, and hopefully we can get you back.
No doubt.
But, please, you know what I'm saying, take whatever that energy is and, bring that love and energy to Ghana. And we really look forward to having an opportunity to get you back on the show.
No doubt. Thank you much, brother.
Okay.
To keep communities connected, through harmonies, a harmony is collected. Reaping the fruits our foremothers invested. Lift every voice till freedom has manifested. Come on, lift every voice till freedom has manifested. Come on, listen, lift every voice till freedom has manifested. Come on.
Sing a song.
Talk to
full of the faith that the dark past has taught us.
Come on.
Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun
Facing the rising sun. Come on.
of our new day begun.
It's a new day.
Let us march on till victory is won. Till victory is
This is
won.
victory music. Come on, I hope you feel it.
Yeah.